Okay, good.
So how's it going there?
Background. What's that?
How's it going there?
It's going well. It's going okay. From what I understand, Israel's doing a little bit better than India these days, as far as
Very bad.
what's that?
India is facing second wave of COVID-19 and it's way too contagious, I would say.
Are you nervous?
Yeah, little bit,
Okay.
because we have seen people being in lockdown and simultaneously political parties promoting their ideologies in some states for elections amid this COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of people in those rallies. So yeah, situation is worse.
Wow. Yeah, it's all over the news. I mean, somehow or other, Israel's gotten to this point where we have almost no cases, almost no deaths. A huge percentage of the population is vaccinated, and it feels like life is turning back to normal here. And then you look
Yeah,
in the news, you see India, you see Brazil, and you realize, no, it is not back to normal.
we
We have a
also
long
thought
way.
the same, that the life is normal now, and then suddenly the cases were on the peak. Like we have got 300K cases in one day. So yeah.
Oh, wow. That's like half the population of the city I live in.
Yeah. So yeah, I have one guest with one member with me, Manisha Chaudhary.
Hey,
She's also a part of Asruta.
how's it going?
Hey, hi David. How's it going there?
Can't complain too much. A long day, but like I said, things are mostly back to normal here, so no complaints. My
Oh,
gym's open again, so I'm happy.
and India has become the worst hit country of the COVID-19 right now.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing. Oh my gosh.
That's very bad, yeah. David, do you know something about the that Britain promised Palestine to the three powers? One of them was the France, other was the Sharif of Makkah. Can you just please tell us about what exactly was the pact about?
I'm I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Or is this is a modern thing, or this is an old
No,
thing
it
you're
was
speaking of?
past in history. It was in the past.
It
It
was
was
when?
it was in past, very old times when
Okay.
Britain was it was during the First World War.
Okay. And this was say it again, it was a pact between
Yeah,
multiple countries?
yeah, sure. The Britain signed a pact between three countries basically and promising the same land, Palestine, and fulfill the none of the promise that he made. So if you know about something, then it will be good if you share your opinion on that.
I'm not 100% certain what you're talking about, but let's see if I could hopefully uh, give a little bit of information. We're talking about
Yeah, no problem.
early 20th century. Okay.
Yeah.
And tell me if at any point my internet cuts out. So in the early 20th century, Israel, obviously there was no Israel. There were people who lived in Israel, Jewish people who lived in Israel, and there had been the hope to return to Israel had been part of the culture for thousands of years, literally since the day the Jewish people left the country in the after the year zero, like right around the year 70, and even more so in the year 120, there was no major Jewish control over the area, but there was this hope. It was a part of the people's hope that there would be this return at some point in history. Most thought it would be supernatural. Nobody thought that we
Yeah,
could
sure.
conquer the land. Nobody thought that anyone would hand it to us. But it was part of the conscious of the people. And in the early 20th century, people realized that there needed to be some type of solution, right? The Jewish people
Yeah.
needed to find a way to be safe because, I like
Yeah.
to say the number one thing that causes anti-Semitism is Jewish people being there, because that's not
That was the
victim
very
blaming.
idea.
Yeah.
Mm.
Unfortunately, if you were to span world history, you'd find that in almost every single location in the world, and in every time period throughout history, there's been anti-Semitism, and it's nonsensical. Sometimes it's because we're too powerful. Sometimes it's because we're too weak. Sometimes it's because we're too different. Sometimes it's because we're trying too hard to be the same. Sometimes it's because we're rich. Sometimes it's because we're poor. It doesn't make a difference. We're there as long as we exist. There will be people out there who are, for whatever reason, hate the Jewish nation, and people started um, moving to Palestine, started
Yeah.
attempting to lay a foundation, and started to gather money and to create a political movement. And so you had this really complicated situation that was forming there, because you had a land that was controlled by England, and
Yeah.
nobody knows better than you guys
Of
how
course.
you do
The
not
divide
want.
and the rule policy.
Yeah, I mean,
That was really.
obviously the United States of America has had its issues with England also, but our issues are much older. I don't think there's a lot of people in the US who are walking around with a chip on their shoulder about England, saying, gosh, I
Yeah.
really wish those English people never interfered with our lives. I think we've forgiven and and forgotten what has happened, but you guys haven't. And so that that if they're in charge, this isn't going to go
Yeah.
well, and it's also not going to last. um, so they're in charge of this area that's now got the indigenous population, we'll call them Palestinians,
Of
and
course.
this rapidly growing Jewish population, who aren't really at odds with each other. If anything, at first they were more at odds with England, both of them. Like
Mm.
you could argue that. I mean, maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you can argue that um, that England uh, turned the anger that was going on
Yes, of
into
course.
anger of these two people against one another, and we're still living in that reality decades later. That's what I personally believe. I think they did it intentionally, or they just didn't care and it's happened. But they made a lot of promises to a lot of people.
Yeah,
They
sure.
broke a lot of promises to a lot of people, and mishandled an entire country, an entire region, leaving us with a mess that we're still in.
Yes, of
Um,
course. They just messed up the whole history of the world sometimes.
they do that.
Um, don't you think that in the pursuit of making Israel, they somehow, degraded the Palestinians and outright them from their land?
do I? I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm not great at accents. I, from the bottom of my heart, apologize if I miss things, and I just
Uh,
want to.
I'm saying that in the pursuit of making a Jewish
Okay.
country, Israel, do you think that Palestinians are outrighted, or because the most population of the Palestinians is Arab, if I'm right?
You're saying now or when the country was founded?
No, you can tell us now what is the situation right now.
Okay. Okay. Now I want to preface everything I say by saying, like everybody else in the world, I come with my own biases. I am Jewish. I am Jewish from my whole life, and I've lived in Israel for as a Jew for a good percentage of my adult life, and I can never not be me. The difference between me and a lot of people is I understand where my biases are. I understand where I lack information, and I never want anyone to feel like they can't argue with me or that they can't disagree with my perspective. But this is where I'm coming from. I would like to believe that we'll say 99.9% of every Jew living in Israel and 99.9% of every Palestinian living in Israel would like to live in peace with one another. Right? There's a small percentage of people who hate the other group, who don't want to have Jews who don't want to have Palestinians near them, Palestinians who don't want to have Jews near them, and they actually hate the other group. But I think they are the vast, vast minority. And I think most people just want to learn to live together. Palestinians want to be regular citizens doing regular jobs. They want to get up in the morning, go to work, come home, have dinner with their families, go to sleep, and start over again. And Jews want to be able to travel wherever they want, and they want to be able to buy a cactus in the Palestinian village without fearing for their life or hiding their any identification that they're Jewish. And everybody just wants to get along already. I think we're growing. The world's growing up. Not everyone. I love to talk about how, if you look at the Middle East, you see Israel right now is creating a lot of peace treaties with different countries, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, the Sudan, and we already have a long-standing one with Jordan and Egypt. Why? Right? These are the last two, Jordan and Egypt. We fought countless wars with them. They tried to kill us, and we just kept on fighting giant, awful, disgusting, bloody battles. And at some point, if you're a modern nation in this generation, you just don't want missiles falling on your country anymore, right? You don't want to send your 19-year-olds off to fight in battles and turn parents into people who have to mourn the death of their children over a useless war. So instead, we don't have to love one another. We don't have to, start the Hug an Egyptian movement, but we have to learn how to be peaceful neighbors. And I think the average person in Israel, both Jewish and Palestinian, want that. I really, truly, from the bottom of my heart, believe that that's what we want.
Yes, at the end, the ultimate goal is the peace only.
What's that?
The ultimate goal of both the countries is peace. What we want is just peace.
And I don't think it really shouldn't even be that hard. We have a complicated history. We have a really complicated history.
For sure, very complicated.
Mistakes have been made on both sides, and leaders have poured a lot of gasoline on the flames. And there are fingers to be pointed. There are people who did terrible things, and it's complicated. It's not going to be as easy as let's shake some hands and sign some paper. I mean, it's also, you can say that our relationship with Egypt is easier because we are separate countries. We share a border, but we're not immersed in each other. Here, we're immersed in each other. I'll tell you just on a something I like to think about a lot, because I mentioned earlier that the gyms are open in Israel. The gym in Jerusalem is one of my favorite places here. And one of the reasons is it's because it's the only place that I know of where there's no religion, there's no politics, right? I hear English, I hear Hebrew, I hear Arabic, I hear Russian, Amharic, I hear all these languages. Everybody is there for a singular purpose. We all want to get in great shape. We want to be healthy. Everyone's happy. And there's men, there's women, and all of the garbage that we see on the news every single day, that doesn't exist in the gym. There's no sign that says you can't talk politics here. We don't need that. It doesn't matter. We work out next to each other. We sweat and get in good shape next to each other. Our anatomies are the same. We're all trying to develop the same physiques and the same muscles. And because of that, I think it's the ideal. I think when you watch people play soccer or football, depending on who's listening, right? We're not talking politics. We're not fighting wars against each other. We're just having fun and getting our endorphins running through our systems and making us happy. It might be a little naive or idealistic, but I think a future where we actually all get along with each other is a real possibility.
Okay, Dad.
That's
I think we have come too far. I didn't plan to go this fast. So Mansha asked you that Britain had transferred the power of Palestine to three powers, right? The region where Israel is, there were three powers to which Britain promised the lands. One of them was Jews. Now my question is that now that when we think of that Israel, to whom the Israel really belonged to, the Palestinians, the Jews, because as far as I remember, the Palestinians too were promised a land, and it's not their fault that Jews come too powerful. What are your opinion aside from keeping aside the biasness, of course?
Well, you can never fully keep aside the bias, but I'll do the best I can. To understand this, you really have to understand the situation in 1948 when Israel became a nation. There was an attempt at the time to create this. I use these words because I don't know how else to phrase it. It's some sort of piecemeal nation, where if you look at the country, portions of it will go to Palestinians, portions of it will go to Israel, portions of it will be internationally controlled, but it doesn't look realistic. It looks like a silly map created by toddlers, thinking that a world could work like that. You don't see that anywhere else. No country has borders that look like the swirly, wacky things
Britain
like that.
Britain did that to us. Like,
oh yeah,
there is left in this Pakistan, then they in middle it is India, and then there is right again it's Pakistan. The borders were drawn to, like, there was some states there were Hindu and some is Muslims, so the borders were drawing like this. You should have seen the map of India. It's no more country, none other country is as curvy as India, I must say. Wait, I would.
Wow. That wasn't working out.
Yeah. So yeah, you can continue what you were saying.
So, sure. So here we were put into a situation where you had two groups, except our group was really just one unit, essentially. Right? We stood together. Ultimately, their group wasn't really a group at all, and it was kind of at the behest of multiple Arab nations that were kind of putting their 2 cents into the situation. right? So there was no Palestinian leadership, central leadership that could say, we accept this plan. We had to wait and see if this vast world of the Arab population would accept the plan. So as you can imagine, if the Jewish people, we'll call it Israel, what did we have before 1948? I mean, World War II ended in 1945. Our people had been decimated. 2/3 of the European Jews were massacred. And we had no home. I mean, we certainly didn't want to go to Germany. We didn't feel safe in Italy or Poland, and what are the other options? Russia? I mean, all these places have been, you're talking about your oldest brother who beats you up really bad, or your middle brother who beats you up slightly less bad. We don't we didn't have a home. We didn't have a safe place to go. So we're given this offer of this piecemeal, wacky country, and we said, okay, fine, we'll take it.
Yeah.
Right. And if the other party had said, okay, fine, we'll take it too, that's what we would have now. Right? If no wars were ever started, if everybody just decided we can compromise, we would have had this piecemeal country with a Jewish part and a Palestinian part, and some parts would go to Jordan, and some parts would go to Egypt, and some, I don't know, maybe some parts internationally controlled, and everybody be some version of happy or content. But the Arab world said absolutely not. And instead of saying, okay, fine, so we'll allow Jewish people to live in Israel, they attacked us. They started a war. And I always forget if it's 4 or 5 or 6 different countries that attacked Israel at once. And they told, this is where things get really, really complicated. And there's going to be a lot of opinions on this subject. They told the Palestinians to leave. Why? They wanted to create an area that would be easy to kill. Right? If you have a land that's just filled with the Jews, you can carpet bomb the hell out of it and destroy your enemy, and not worry about destroying your own people, the people you don't want to harm. So they told them to leave in order to be able to make it easier to destroy us. Now, we weren't supposed to win.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have won. How? I don't have an answer to that question. I don't have an answer to that question in 1948. I don't have an answer to that question in 1967. We won multiple wars that we should not have won. We did not have an air force. All the things that keeps Israel strong now, we didn't have any of that. We didn't have weaponry. We didn't have friends. We didn't have an organized military, but we won, and we embarrassed the Muslim world by winning because of everything that I said. We should not have won. You can argue we won because we had our heart. We had we cared more. We had more to lose, so we fought in a way that was more passionate, but we won, and we ended up with more land than we originally would have gotten if we had taken the original deal. And this gigantic humanitarian crisis was created because of all these Palestinians who were told to leave. So they just assumed, okay, war's over, we go back. But that wasn't how it played out. And now you have a refugee crisis that has never properly ended. And it wasn't like you had this group of people that would stay finite. They're going to have children and more children and more children. And the number of refugees is just going to grow exponentially.
Yeah.
And you have an enormous, enormous humanitarian crisis. Now, you might have some camps of Jewish people who say, you left the country so we could die. You're not our problem. And I mean, I understand that that's a hurtful way of phrasing it, but I think most people understand the perspective. Also, Israel is the size of New Jersey. It's this puny little nothing land. Why is the massive Middle East not stepping up and saying, fine, we'll adopt these people into our countries and solve things that way? So, so that's one side of the argument. Another side of the argument will, of course, say that it was their land. They lived there beforehand. They need to be allowed to return to it. That's Israel's responsibility. Others might say the nation that was just decimated in a Holocaust a few years earlier should be ultra sympathetic to the cause of other people. Of course, we have to do whatever we can for these refugees. And I understand all of these perspectives. They're all extremely valid. And to some extent, pieces of all of them were adopted. But one thing is for certain, no matter what way you look at it, we were not the aggressors. We were not the ones who started the war or the violence in any fashion. And also we're the victors. And it's a complicated situation to be in. If people's sympathy for Israel started to go away when we started being the underdogs. It's a real weird historical perspective. Fun fact, our biggest supporter until 1967 was France. France was a huge, huge, huge supporter of Israel.
Yeah.
They supplied us with military might, if you will, and they cut us off in 1967. 1967 is when we won probably the most amazing military victory in the history of the world. I mean, I'm not a historian. I can't say for sure that it's the best. It's got to be up there. A war where we absolutely dominated 4 attacking nations in 6 days has to be one of the most amazing military feats ever. And at that point, France was like, yeah, never mind. We're not your supporter anymore. And we had a void for 3 years until we created a relationship with the United States. But during that period, we were still at least somewhat of an underdog. And people like to support the underdogs. The Palestinians are the underdogs now. And the world looks at them as the ones who need to be looked out for. They need to put their arm around the Palestinian world and be there for them. We don't have that status anymore. We lost it by being strong. We lost it by creating a dominant, impressive military force, despite our history, and despite the fact that we did it against all odds.
You just said that you were not aggressive and yet victorious. When I was reading about this topic, I was told that it was Jews who first came into the groups in the Palestine land and covered the farmland of Palestine, and then they formed the groups around cities, and then most of the Jews were come and all the era of the fighting started. Most of the book says that it was Jews who started the fighting, which I have read, of course. So what's your view on this?
Okay. So my understanding is that's completely false. Now, I make no claim of being a brilliant historian or being extraordinarily well read on the topic, and I'm certain that there are biases from people. I'm sure there are extremely historically accurate books, and I'm sure there are books written that make it out as if the Israelis could do no wrong, and other books that make it out as if the Israelis could only do wrong. But my understanding of the earliest times before 1948 is we came to a desolate, pathetic country. Israel was not habitable. It was gross. There's a famous story. Mark Twain visited Palestine. I apologize, but I don't know the year. And he described it as being a wasteland that nobody could possibly do anything with. And we came in and we turned it into a country. I don't know if either of you have ever been here, but what we've done in 70 years is insane.
Yeah,
But
I
we
know.
came to a heap of crap, basically. The country was not in good shape. We spent that time making the country into a country, emptying swamps and building an infrastructure. During that time, most of the aggression that I'm familiar with was not Jewish against Palestinian. There were pockets of Palestinian against Jews. I don't think they're the main part of the story. They're part of, like, for example, in 1929, I believe.
David, your voice is cutting.
Or a riot in the city of Hebron.
Hello, David, your voice is cutting.
If you're, might have been, yeah, sorry. What was the last thing you heard?
Yeah, like there was a cut in between. Now it's fine. Like you were like,
Okay.
okay.
Technology, it's lovely, huh? No, I was saying that there were pockets of aggression, Palestinians toward Jews. And when I say aggression, I mean it was bad, really bad stuff. The greatest example was when there was a riot. I can't remember if it was 1919 or 1929, but there was the Palestinians were compelled to attack the Jewish community there. You can go to Hebron and see a museum with pictures of what was done, and it's grotesque. People with their arms hacked off. It was absolutely disgusting. But I believe that even that was an anomaly. I don't think that the major story of early Israel was aggression of Jew versus Palestinian or Palestinian versus Jew. I think most of the aggression was England toward either group or either group toward England.
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the most famous examples, Israel had a whole batch of different factions, right? The Histadrut and the Etzel and all these different groups that disagreed on how violent or not violent they needed to be to stop the British. Some were extraordinarily violent, and at one point they blew up a hotel, a wing of a hotel, killing a whole bunch of British leadership. And yeah.
I read that
No
answer
question?
on Quora.
Okay.
Yeah.
King David Hotel. It was a big deal. But it had to do it had nothing to do with this conflict. The conflict between the Jew and the Palestinian was rare. It was people told me stories. Even I used to live in a community called Karmei Tzor. Karmei Tzor is this very small Jewish settlement. It's surrounded by 3 Palestinian villages, and it has a fence with barbed wire around it. They're not friendly with neighbors. In fact, while I was living in Karmei Tzor, one of my neighbors was killed on his drive home. So I've unfortunately I've lived in the heart of how bad things could be. But my neighbors there told me stories about how they used to trade things over the fence, and they would chat with their neighbors. And at one point in history, not everybody was angry. So it developed, and it only got worse with each war. It got worse with each rebellion. Things got worse. Everybody wants everything, and that's a problem because you can't. We've tried numerous times to have peace deals with Palestinian leadership. One of the most famous was with Yasser Arafat, where he was offered there were the land that they wanted, right? And we offered, it was something like 97.5 of what they were, the percent of what they were asking for. And he said no. Went right back to each other. So if compromise is going to be made, it's going to have to come from both sides. And as long as we keep negotiating and the negotiations fail, I think things are going to either stay bad or get worse, but they're not going to get better, unfortunately.